young nurse was fired from her hospital for daring to pay for medicine for a poor patient. Everyone thought she had lost everything: her career, her honor, and her faith in her profession. But no one expected that. From In the Shadow of Failure, a greater opportunity was silently waiting for her. A powerful person witnessed it all and decided to turn things around. A story of kindness being punished, then rewarded, begins from that moment on. Welcome to Kindness Stories, where stories of kindness and goodness are told in the most special way. Sometimes doing the right thing can get you in trouble, but who knows, it could be the beginning of something magical. Today, join us as we explore the emotional journey of a young nurse who risked everything to save a life, and how her life changed forever. In the soft light of early morning, Hopewell General Hospital bustles with activity as medical staff begin their shifts. The hospital is renowned for its state-of-the-art facilities, but it is also known for its strict internal regulations, especially those related to finances and treatment costs. Elise Hartmann, a young and enthusiastic nurse, walked into the reception area. She wore a clean white uniform, her hair was neatly tied back, and she always had a warm smile on her face. As the daughter of a poor carpenter, Elise knew the hardships of those who could not afford hospital bills. That was what inspired her to become a nurse, someone who brought hope and comfort to those who needed it most. That morning, as Elise was checking the vital signs of the patients in the ward, she noticed Mr. Walter Green, a man in his 70s, sitting on his hospital bed, gasping for breath. He tried to hide his fatigue, but his ragged breathing betrayed his critical condition. "Mr. Green, are you okay?" Elise asked with concern. Mr. Walter nodded weakly, but he couldn't hide the persistent dry cough. Elise quickly checked his breathing. She realized that he needed an emergency bronchodilator, or he could go into respiratory failure on the spot. She rushed to the hospital's internal pharmacy, where the pharmacist informed her that the hospital could not provide emergency medication to Mr. Walter because he had not paid the necessary fee. His family has not paid the hospital bill, and according to the regulations, we cannot provide the medication until payment is made, the pharmacist explained, with a look of concern. Elise looked back at Walter, who was struggling to catch his breath. Time did not allow her to wait. Her heart was heavy, but she knew she could not stand by. In a moment of determination, she pulled her wallet from her pocket and pulled out a $50 bill, almost the last of her money for the week. "Please give me this medicine right away," Elise said firmly, her eyes determined. The pharmacist hesitated for a moment, but complied. A few minutes later, Elise returned to Mr. Walter's bedside and gave him the necessary injection. His breathing gradually stabilized, his face less pale. He held her hand tightly, his eyes filled with gratitude. "God bless you, young lady, thank you." Elise smiled, relieved. It was the moment she remembered that the reason she became a nurse wasn't for the pay or the promotion, but to save lives, like Mr. Walter. But she did not expect that her actions were observed by a sharp pair of eyes, the eyes of Mrs. Linda Croft, the manager of the nursing department. Linda Croft is the senior manager of the nursing department, known for being more disciplined than anyone else. Her tall, thin figure, sharp face, and wire-rimmed glasses give her a stern look. To many of her staff, she is the embodiment of discipline and coolness. Linda entered the hospital room with an authoritative air, her high heels clicking on the tiled floor, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. Elise immediately sensed her presence. "Elise Hartmann, can you explain your actions?" Her voice was as cold steel. Elise turned, startled. Even though she knew she had done the right thing, she could still feel the tidal wave coming. "Mrs. Linda, Mr. Walter Green is in critical condition. He cannot wait. I used my own money to buy medicine for him," Elise said, her voice shaking with both worry and anger. Linda crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. Rules are rules, Elise. Who do you think you are to decide how to spend hospital funds? This isn't a charity, and you have no right to interfere with the process. But he could have died if I hadn't done something. Who would be responsible if that happened, Linda? I can't just stand by and do nothing. Elise retorted, her voice filled with determination. Linda took a step forward, her eyes coldly looking straight at Elise. You have broken hospital regulations. Don't think that your kindness will justify your wrongdoing. Kindness without discipline will destroy the whole system. The words stabbed Elise in the heart like a knife. She clenched her fists, trying to contain her anger. If saving a life is wrong, then maybe I don't belong here. A tense silence fell over the room. The nurses around stood silently, no one daring to intervene. They all knew that when Linda gave an order, no one dared to argue. Linda smiled faintly, her eyes as sharp as knives. Then you're right. You don't belong here anymore. She turned around and coldly announced, You are fired immediately. Pack your things and leave the hospital within 30 minutes. Otherwise, I will notify security. Elise stood frozen, shock washing over her like a cold wave. She looked around, hoping for one of her colleagues to speak up for her, but everyone just bowed their heads in silence. Marcel's daughter joined her. Mrs. Linda turned and walked away, leaving a heavy atmosphere. A few nurses approached Elise, their eyes filled with regret and sympathy, but no one dared to say a word. Elise bit her lip to hold back her tears, not because she felt she was wrong, but because the injustice was crushing her heart. All she had done was save one person, something a nurse was always supposed to do. She took the name tag off her uniform and looked at the name Elise Hartman on the small piece of plastic. She had been so proud of it. Now it lay in the palm of her hand, meaningless, empty. Elise walked out of the hospital room, her eyes vacant. She told herself that even if she were fired, she would never regret what she had done. Elise faces injustice from a system that puts rules above compassion. She was fired for doing the right thing, but she stood by her choice. Internal conflicts begin to form, and the reader will clearly feel that this is not just a story about a fired nurse, but also a journey to affirm the value of kindness in a system full of rigid rules. That afternoon, Elise Hartman left Hopewell General Hospital with a small bag containing a few personal items. It was drizzling, and the water fell gently on her hair, mixing with the sadness that was invading her heart. She was in no hurry to go home. She stopped in front of a small coffee shop across the street from the hospital. It was a place she and her colleagues often went to take a break between shifts. But this time, she was not here as a nurse at Hopewell General. Sitting in a secluded corner, Elise stared at the hot cup of coffee in front of her. The steam rising up was hazy, just like her current confused state of mind. She didn't regret saving Mr. Walter, but she didn't expect that doing the right thing would lead to this consequence. Was I really wrong, she wondered, but then shook her head immediately. While she was lost in thought, an elderly man, about 60, walked into the cafe. He wore a luxurious gray suit, shiny leather shoes, a leisurely demeanor, but sharp eyes. Mr. Victor Stanton, the owner of Hopewell Hospital, had been watching her since she walked out of the hospital. Victor didn't walk straight to her, but bought a cup of coffee first, then slowly walked over to the table where Elise was sitting. "Do you mind if I sit here?" he asked, his voice deep but powerful. Elise looked up, not recognizing him. She shrugged. "It's okay, this seat is empty." Of course. Victor sat down, stirring his coffee quietly. He glanced at her from across the table. She looked tired, her eyes filled with emotion, but she still had the determination of someone who would not give up easily. He sent men over to the porch to sit by the rock. "You seem to be having a bad day," Victor said, his voice like a father trying to comfort his child. Elise chuckled, shaking her head. "Bad is the least of it. I just lost my job trying to save a life. Victor tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as if considering her every word. That sounds absurd. I thought saving lives was a nurse's job, wasn't it? Elise laughed, but her laugh was bitter. Yes, that should be the case, but in this hospital, saving lives is also subject to financial regulations. Victor put his coffee cup down on the table, looking straight at her. So if you had the chance to do it again, would you do it differently? I would. Elise looked up, her eyes shining with determination. No. Victor was silent for a moment, then nodded. He pulled a business card from his vest pocket and placed it in front of Elise. It read, Victor Stanton, owner of HopewellHospitals.com. Elise's heart stopped. She recognized the name immediately. He was the owner of the hospital, the highest authority in the system she had just been fired from. She looked at him, her eyes bewildered and confused. I saw the whole thing from beginning to end, Elise, he said, his voice low but powerful, and I believe you are not wrong. Where is it? She asked. Elise couldn't believe her ears. You? You saw everything? Hush. Victor nodded. I've seen you do the right thing in a system with too many rigid rules, and people like you are exactly the kind of people I need. Elise hesitated. What do you mean? Come see me in the executive office tomorrow. I have a special opportunity for you, Victor said. He stood up, leaving his half-full cup of coffee behind, and turned to leave. Elise sat there, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at the card as if it were a key that would open a new door in her life. Mr. Victor Stanton's office door. She clutched her bag tightly, her heart filled with excitement. She had spent a sleepless night thinking about this meeting. The voice came from behind. You're here? Elise turned to see Linda Croft approaching, her face as stern as ever. Linda gave a sarcastic smile. What else are you trying to beg for, Elise? Linda curled her lips, her eyes filled with disdain. Elise took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. I don't need any favors. Linda. Before Linda could reply, the office door opened. Mr. Victor Stanton appeared, waving his hand. Elise, please come in. Linda looked at Victor in surprise, then at Elise, but did not dare say anything. She entered the room, feeling the solemnity and power that pervaded the place. Victor sat behind a large desk, sunlight streaming through the large glass windows, illuminating his back like a halo. Elise sat across from him, her heart trembling. Do you know why I called you here? He asked. Elise shook her head, her eyes never leaving him. Not only do you want your job back, Victor said firmly, but I want you to take on greater responsibility. He stood up and walked around the table. We're launching a patient assistance program, a new project to make sure people like Walter are taken care of, whether they have money or not. Elise's eyes widened in surprise. What do you mean? I mean, Victor looked her straight in the eye. I want you to be the director of this program. Elise exhaled, her heart pounding. Me? but I'm just a nurse. Because you are a nurse, you understand the pain of patients better than anyone, Victor said. You have shown that you have the courage to do the right thing, even if it means losing everything. That is the kind of person I need. Linda suddenly walked in, unable to hide her displeasure. Mr. Stanton, I don't think this is a wise decision, said the senior man. Mrs. Croft, Victor interrupted. If you don't know how to recognize a competent person, then perhaps you don't belong here. Linda was speechless, her eyes darkened. She turned and left the room, not daring to say another word. Elise turned to Victor, tears in her eyes. She couldn't believe how quickly her life could change. Thank you, she said, her voice choking. Don't thank me, Victor replied. Thank yourself for your kindness. Sherman Albright getting certain people from their dark places. Support. Elise smiled, tears falling down her cheeks. But this time, they were tears of happiness. She realized that sometimes kindness not only changed other people's lives, but also changed her own. 3 months later, the atmosphere at Hopewell General Hospital had changed dramatically. A shiny new brass plaque had been installed on the main wall of the hospital lobby. The inscription was clearly engraved from the Great Adalmite Washboard. Patient Support Program provided you by Texas Chapter and the National Voters Board. Patient Support Program. Below is a smaller caption. Program Director Elise Hartman. Elise stood in front of the sign, her eyes filled with pride and emotion. Today was the official launch of the program she had spent 3 months creating. Looking at the words engraved on the sign, she felt something bigger than herself. She had gone from being a fired nurse to being responsible for one of the hospital's most meaningful initiatives. Inside the main hall, a small ceremony was held to announce the program. The medical staff, nurses, and doctors were all present, including former colleagues who had witnessed the day Linda Croft fired her. Today, they looked at her differently, with admiration and respect. Victor Stanton stepped onto the stage, his eyes shining, his voice booming in the auditorium. We all know that hospitals are places that save lives, but for years we have been obsessed with dry financial regulations, he said, his voice firm and authoritative. But today we are righting the wrongs. The Patient Assistance Program is a promise that no one will be left behind just because they can't afford it. The entire hall erupted in applause. Many looked at Elise, smiling proudly, knowing that she was the reason everything had changed. And the person behind this program's success, Mr. Victor continued, is someone who had the courage to do the right thing, even when it cost her everything. But today, she not only regained what she lost, she gained so much more. Victor extended his hand toward Elise. Please welcome the Director of Patient Support Programs, Elise Hartman. Applause broke out. Elise stepped onto the stage, trying to keep a calm smile, but feeling overwhelmed. She saw familiar faces in the crowd, colleagues, nurses, even Linda Croft, who stood at the back of the room looking uncomfortable but not daring to say a word. Thank you, everyone. Elise took the microphone, her voice soft but firm. 3 months ago, I thought I had lost everything, but it turns out I was just getting started. The audience listened to her in silence, Elise's every word carrying weight. I used to think that saving lives was my job as a nurse, but sometimes doing the right thing isn't always easy. I've learned that if you hold on to what you believe is right, life will never abandon you. Today, I want every patient in this hospital to know you are not alone. Pro diplomas. The applause was thunderous again. Elise bowed her head in thanks, tears threatening to fall, but she held them back. Nitse Christ, Manditixu Christiana. The ceremony ended and Elise left the auditorium and walked down the long hospital corridor. The midday sun shone through the clear glass, casting shimmering rays on the floor. She stopped, leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. You did it, a familiar voice said. Elise opened her eyes, turned around, and recognized Mr. Walter Green, the patient she had risked her life to pay for medicine to save. Mr. Green? Elise smiled, stepping toward him. He looked much healthier than last time. His face was rosy, his eyes bright, and he was no longer on a ventilator. You did it, young lady, Mr. Walters said, patting her on the shoulder. I hear you're now the director of the new support program. I'm so proud of you. Elise smiled brightly. You're feeling much better, aren't you? Better because of you, he replied, his eyes soft. If you hadn't stood up for me that day, I probably wouldn't be here today. Elise squeezed his hand. You reminded me why I became a nurse, Mr. Walter. Then keep reminding the others, Elise, he said, his voice warm. Remind them that kindness is never wrong. Elise nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I will, sir." Elise stepped outside, standing in front of the main entrance of Hopewell Hospital. Ambulances wailed in the distance, and groups of patients and their families streamed in and out. But this time, Elise was no longer the little nurse who had been fired. She stood up straight, her head held high, her eyes looking straight ahead. In her hand was a new ID card with the words "Patient Support Program Director" printed in bold. She smiled, stepped forward, and joined the bustling crowd. But this time, she was not just a small part of the system. She was the change maker. Elise Hartman's life is a testament to a valuable lesson. Sometimes standing up for what's right will cost you everything, but if you hold on to your values, greater opportunities will come your way. Kindness may be mocked, but it also has the power to change the world. Elise didn't just save one person's life, she saved an entire system. When she was fired for her kindness, she fell, but thanks to her resilience, she got up and climbed to a higher level. And now, under the name of the Patient Assistance Program, kindness is more than just a momentary act. It has become policy. It has become a legacy. It has become a reminder that no one is left behind. End quote. Elise Hartman's story ends here, but her lessons of kindness, perseverance, and courage will continue to spread. Thank you for watching today's heartwarming story on Kindness Stories. Sometimes an act of kindness can get you in trouble, but remember that kindness is never wrong. If you feel this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories. Spread kindness, because you never know how your small act can change someone's life. See you in the next story, where kindness always shines, even in the darkest moments.